Subscribe to our YouTube channel and press the bell icon so that you never miss any video lesson from RAU'S IAS Study Circle. Hello and welcome to the Daily News Simplified, an analysis of the Hindu newspaper from UPSC perspective. Today we will discuss the Delhi edition of the Hindu newspaper dated 14th November 2022. And the articles that we will discuss today are displayed on your screen. So let us start the discussion. Now this article on page number 9 is related to data localization norms that are being adopted across the world, and it has generated much debate. That the data that is being generated in one country, should it be stored in that country only, or should the MNCs be allowed to move or store this data across the global borders? Now, as we all are aware that the data and its role is increasing day by day, and data is of much value, and data is considered as the new oil. And that is why it is being debated that the data which is generated in one country should be stored in that country only. This is because such storage of data within the territorial boundaries of a country would help the law enforcement agencies. It would protect the rights and the privacy of the citizens of a country. So in this article, we will try and understand the importance of data in the new global order. Further, what is meant by this term data localization, and what are the present norms regarding data localization in India. And after this, we will look at the benefits and concerns related to the issue of data localization. So first, let us look at the importance of data in the new global order. So first is that data is considered to be the new oil. So it enjoys the same importance which the oil enjoyed in the previous times. Now in this regard, the technological giants like the Apple, Amazon, Google, Microsoft and Facebook have been using the data generated by their users to make huge profits. And the combined valuation of these technological giants stand at about $800 billion, which is way greater than the overall GDP of even Saudi Arabia, which is a major oil giant. Further, the personal user data is considered to be one of the most important ingredient of the Industrial Revolution 4.0, which is being led by the big data and artificial intelligence. Now here it is important to note that with the advent of Industrial Revolution, Britain became the superpower of the world, and eventually it colonized various countries across the world. So similarly, it is said that the country which enjoys hold or control over the personal user data of people will enjoy global economic and geopolitical dominance. And this has led to the fears of digital colonization on the similar lines of the past century colonization. Now presently, the USA and China have taken a lead in the Industrial Revolution 4.0 by focusing more on big data as well as artificial intelligence. Now as China and US are focusing on these two aspects and are ushering in a new era of Industrial Revolution, that is Industrial Revolution 4.0, it has raised concerns regarding India. And because of this, India will have to depend upon these two countries, that is USA and China. And if India becomes dependent on these countries, it will lead to digital colonization of India. So in this background, let us look at what is the importance of data localization and what are the norms in India regarding data localization. After this, let us look at the benefits and concerns regarding data localization. Now, data localization essentially refers to the storage of data within the borders of a country, which means that if the data relates to Indian citizens, it should be stored on the servers in India and should not be stored beyond its borders. So this simply means that the data should be stored where it is generated. And India has been in favor of this data localization policy, which is reflected in its various norms. For example, the draft e-commerce policy has mandated the data localization norms for e-commerce companies like Flipkart, Amazon, etc. Further, regarding various payment system operators, the RBI has mandated compulsory storage of payment related data in servers which are physically located in India. So both these policies and norms are aimed at storing the data in India and protecting the data from foreign entities. Now besides these two initiatives, a panel was created by the government of India which was named as Sri Krishna panel, and it had also recommended for data localization norms in order to ensure the privacy of sensitive user data. So India asserts that data which is generated in India and relates to its citizens should be stored physically in India in servers. And it should not be stored by digital giants like Amazon, Flipkart, Facebook, Google, or Microsoft across its borders. So after understanding what is data localization, it is important for us to understand as to why the data localization is necessary or important for India. So first in this line is that the data localization is important for securing the citizens' data, data privacy, data sovereignty, as well as national security. Because we are aware that if data of the citizens is stolen, it is going to lead to cybersecurity breaches, etc. And that is why it is very, very important. Secondly, it will help in stopping data mining and commercialization of data. Further, with increasing technological improvements with cloud computing technology, the Indian users' data are stored outside the country's boundary, and this may lead to a conflict of jurisdiction in case of any dispute. And that is why it would be easy for the law enforcement agencies to have easy access to data if the data is stored within the country. Further, it will prevent foreign surveillance or espionage or spying if the data is stored within the country. Also, data localization will benefit the growth of the local ecosystem, and at the same time, data localization could boost India's renewable energy, etc. Now, as we have seen that data localization is important for India because of various reasons, it is also important for us to understand what are the global practices in this regard. So let us look at the global practices. In this line, the European Union had released its General Data Protection Regulations, or the GDPR rules. And according to the EU's GDPR rules, it is not mandatory to have local storage of data. Besides, cross-border flow of information is permitted if adequate data protection framework is there in the recipient country. Further, United States of America does not even have a federal law for data protection. However, China and Vietnam mandate strict data localization norms. In this case, Canada and Australia have taken a middle path. That is, they are selective in that they have provisions to protect their health data. And in case of India, as data localization norms have been enforced by various regulations related to e-commerce as well as RBI regulations, this has not been taken well by the industry as well as MNCs and countries like United States of America and European Union, which are in favor of free flow of data across the borders. And that is why we also need to understand the pros and cons of data localization norms. Let us look at them now. Now, what are the likely benefits of data localization? So, the Economic Survey of 2018 and 19 has a chapter related to this data protection. And the title of this chapter is Data of the People, by the People and for the People. This simply means that data should be considered as a public good. And in this line, this data should be accessible to the Indian public. And also, the government should be able to utilize this data for creating policies which are related to education, health, etc. So in short, this will help in providing evidence-based policy making. And further, by data localization, the governments can prevent the commercial exploitation of this data by the foreign companies. Now, this chapter on data localization of the Eco Survey has been discussed in a video related to Eco Survey. So you should go through that video. The second benefit is that it will boost the law enforcement related to the abuse and misuse of data. So it will simplify the process of detection of crime and will also help the authorities in gathering evidence for prosecution. And this is mainly because the authorities can easily access the data which is available within the country. However, it would be difficult for the authorities to procure the data from foreign entities, which might take time and will reduce the effectiveness of these law enforcement authorities. So that is why this is also one of the benefits of data localization norms. The third benefit is that the data localization norms aim at reducing the vulnerabilities of the citizens. Now in this line, one of the important case that happened was related to a company known as Cambridge Analytica. And this Cambridge Analytica tried to misuse the global MNC data for manipulating the public opinion and also impacting and manipulating their voting behavior. So this event shows that such kind of manipulation can lead to erosion in the democratic values, as it is leading to impact on the public opinion in their voting behavior. And that is why bringing in the data localization norms will reduce the vulnerabilities and will ensure the digital sovereignty of India. Further, by ensuring the data localization norms, it is likely to give thrust to the Industrial Revolution 4.0, which is being led by the research in big data and the AI, or the artificial intelligence. Now, if the data is stored locally in India, it will lead to increased FDI in the digital infrastructure and is also likely to create high skilled jobs in the field of big data and the artificial intelligence. And this can be one of the pillars in fulfilling the government of India's aim of converting Indian economy into a $5 trillion economy. And further, by storing the data locally, the government's aim at preventing foreign surveillance of its citizens. Now, after this, let us look at some of the concerns which are related to the issue of data localization. So, the first concern is that it is likely to increase the compliance cost. Now, presently, the Indian companies are storing their data in servers which are located in other countries, and that is very cheap in nature. However, if such norms are imposed, the likely compliance cost is likely to increase. This is mainly because of lack of digital infrastructure in India presently. So in order to comply with these norms, the Indian companies will have to create their own digital infrastructure, which is a costly and expensive process. And if the compliance cost increases, it is likely to reduce the profit margins of these companies, and it can overall impact the economic sentiment in the country. Further, there is again fear of monopolization of data. This is because if the data localization norms are imposed, even then the data will be monopolized by some of the big MNCs of the country itself. For example, if the data is being stored locally in India, even then this data will be monopolized by some big MNCs. And in such a scenario, the micro, small and medium enterprises will not be able to benefit from such a norm. Further, as the data will only be stored locally and its position and location will not be diversified, it increases the threats of cyber attacks. And if one such cyber attack destroys the data, there will be no more copies in other countries which is saved. And that is how it can impact the data through the cyber attacks. Further, the data localization norms cannot completely ensure the privacy issues. This is mainly because the data is still vulnerable to the cyber attacks. And even when the data is stored locally, the cyber attacks are difficult to prevent. And that is why it is not necessary that the privacy issues will be handled 100% by ensuring these data localization norms. Now, as we have seen the benefits and concerns regarding the data localization, the author has suggested that in the recent RCEP negotiations, the India should focus on ensuring the data localization norms. This is because it is important for India's political, economic and military interests. And if India is able to provide for these data localization norms, India's digital security would not be compromised. Thus, author says that India must retain its ability to formulate its own data policy space to shape its digital industrialization and digital future. And thus, India must proactively engage with RCEP members to protect its own interests and concerns. So these were few points related to the data localization, and with this let's take up the next article. This article on page number 6 is about Russia-Ukraine war. In this line, we are aware that the Russian aggression against Ukraine is still ongoing after 6 months of the attack that Russia had conducted on some of the territories of Ukraine. Now, this ongoing war is leading to economic difficulties across the globe, including food security, increase in inflation, increase in the prices of oil and gas, etc. And in this context, all the countries of the world want an end to this Russia-Ukraine war so that global difficulties could be minimized. In this context, some of the leading newspapers of the United States of America have asserted that India should negotiate or mediate peace between Russia and Ukraine. And this has been highlighted because of the leverage that India has with the Russian leader Vladimir Putin. However, author in this article has highlighted that although we understand that the world economy is facing issues because of Russia-Ukraine war, however, India should not mediate between Russia and Ukraine because it is going to have negative implications for India's foreign policy. And in the past also we have seen such issues happening when India had tried to mediate peace between warring countries. And this is primarily because this is a Cold War like situation that is going on with Russia and China on the one side and United States of America and its allies on the other side. Now, similar situation was witnessed during the Afghanistan war in 1980s when Russia had invaded Afghanistan. During that period, United States of America's main goal was to defeat Russia in its maneuvers in Afghanistan. And during the Afghanistan war, to get Russia out of the Afghanistan, the United States of America never took the India's demands seriously. Now, in this context, let us try and understand what are the lessons that India can take from its mediation during the Afghanistan war. After this, let us try and understand what is India's stand and what are the issues with any kind of mediation if India goes forward with mediation. Now, it is being asserted that the calls for mediation are primarily because of India's increasing influence in the global affairs. However, the author is cautioning against this. So let us look at all these aspects one by one. In this line, first we need to understand what was India's stand during the Russia-Ukraine war. So when Russia had invaded Ukraine, the US and the West European countries had put to vote a resolution at the United Nations Security Council against Russia. In this context, there were calls that India should also vote in favor of this resolution against Russia. However, India had abstained from backing this UNSC resolution against Russia. And this is primarily because India has good relations with Russia because Russia is one of the important defense partners of India, as well as India has good relations with the United States of America. However, India clearly considers this escalation in case of Ukraine to be a result of the Cold War 2.0 between Russia and the United States of America. And that is why India was hesitant to support any US-backed UNSC resolution against Russia, despite India aligning with the United States of America on various fronts in the global geopolitics, especially in the Indo-Pacific in the form of Quad, as well as I2U2 in the West Asia. So in this context, India did not support the US-backed UNSC resolution on Ukraine against Russia. And this stand of India was clearly highlighted by the statement that India had given during the debate related to this UNSC resolution. So India said that it was deeply disturbed by the recent turn of developments in Ukraine. In this line, India had urged that all efforts should be made for immediate cessation of violence and hostilities. Further, India said that the contemporary global order has been built on the UN Charter, international law, and respect for sovereignty and territorial integrity of the states. Now, this was a reference towards respecting territorial integrity because of Russian aggression. In this line, India said that all the member states need to honor these principles in finding a constructive way forward. So basically, India had highlighted that all the countries should focus or follow the UN Charter and its principles. And at the same time, India highlighted that dialogue and diplomacy is the only answer to settling disputes and differences and not the war. However, India abstained from voting or supporting any UNSC resolution against Russia. So that is why the India's stand on the Russian aggression was that it had abstained from any West-backed UN-led resolution against Russia. Further, India had advocated a return to diplomacy and dialogue, and by balancing and not taking sides, India had balanced its relations with both the United States of America and Russia. And this has led several countries to call for India to mediate between Ukraine and Russia because India has balanced its ties between two opponents, that is US and Russia, especially in the context of the Russia-Ukraine war. And because of this balanced approach, there are countries which are calling India to mediate peace between Ukraine and Russia so that it could be good for the global peace as well as global economy. However, the author has cautioned against any such kind of mediation, and in this he has highlighted the Russian invasion of Afghanistan that took place in 1980s. Now, in this context, the author has highlighted the lessons that India can learn from Russian aggression of Afghanistan back in 1980s. Now, this was a time of Cold War when USSR, the erstwhile USSR, and the United States of America were involved in a Cold War-like situation. And Afghanistan was one of the theaters of this Cold War when Russia had invaded Afghanistan. So, United States of America desperately wanted Russia out of Afghanistan, and it wanted Russia to lose this war in Afghanistan. In that context, because of influence that India had in Afghanistan, US wanted India to mediate with Russia for its early withdrawal from Afghanistan. In this line, as a bargain where India would play a key role in Russian withdrawal from Afghanistan, US had assured India that it would restrict Pakistan's nuclear program, which was seen as one of the biggest threats by India for its security. However, US did not want any other active role to be played by India in Afghanistan. In this line, it just wanted India to use its leverage with the Soviets. So this was a situation where US is not very predictable and very reliable, which has been highlighted by the author in this article. So in this context, the author says that although India's influence has increased considerably in the past 30-40 years after the Afghanistan war, still India should stay away from mediating in such kind of conflicts. Now, what are the issues with such mediation? So let us look at these issues with the mediation. So in this context, it has been highlighted that the US and the West wish India to use its leverage against Russia to abandon the war and negotiate with Ukraine. So in this context, the author highlights that it is appropriate for India to point towards the growing global difficulties because of Russian action. We are aware that global economy is facing issues because of rising inflation, because of increase in the commodity prices, which is a result of increase in oil and gas prices. Also, the world is facing food insecurity because Russia and Ukraine are one of the highest producers of wheat. So in this context, the author says that it is appropriate for India to point towards the global difficulties that are arising because of Russian action. And it would also be correct for India to keep emphasizing that the way out is through dialogue as well as diplomacy, which is also the officially stated stand of India during the Russia-Ukraine war. However, the author says that it would be counterproductive to go beyond such exhortations and to directly or actively involve itself into mediation between Russia and Ukraine. And why does the author say so? This is because the author says that the issue here is not that the mediation would fail. However, the issue here is that such kind of mediation, if it fails, it would expose the true extent of India's global influence and also its limitations of the personal chemistry between leaders in influencing the events, because it is being highlighted that the Prime Minister of India, Narendra Modi, has considerable leverage with the Russian counterpart Vladimir Putin. And that is why there are calls that our Prime Minister Narendra Modi should negotiate with Vladimir Putin. However, the author says that such kind of personal chemistry between the leaders and its influence on the global events would be exposed if the mediation fails. So that is why India should not play a very active role in mediation. However, it should keep on calling the global difficulties that are being witnessed because of the Russian action. And at the same time, we should be firm with our stand that dialogue and diplomacy are the only way out to solve such kind of crisis. So with this, let's take up the next news article now. This article on page number 6 has been written in the context of the COP27 of the UNFCCC that is going to be held very soon. In this context, this article highlights that there has been inadequate response towards climate finance. In this context, let us try and understand what is climate finance and how it has developed over the years. Also, let us look at the performance of such climate finance that has started, how it has been implementing on the ground. And also, what are the challenges that are faced related to the climate finance which cause a threat to the target that has been set by the Paris deal of arresting global warming. Now, the first thing that we need to understand is what is climate finance. So according to the UNFCCC, that is the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, and its Standing Committee on Finance, climate finance is that finance which aims at reducing the emissions, and it aims at improving the greenhouse gas sinks as well as reducing the vulnerability of and maintaining and increasing the resilience of human and ecological systems to negative climate change impacts. Which means that the UNFCCC has created a definition of climate finance which is aiming at reducing the emissions at the same time which also aims at improving the ecological systems and also improving the greenhouse gas sinks. Now in this context, the term has been used in different senses. In a narrower sense, it refers to those finance that is provided by public resources or by the governments from developed countries to developing countries. However, in a wider sense, it refers to all the financial flows which are related to climate change mitigation as well as adaptation, and not just those funds which are transferred by developed countries to developing countries, or the public funds that are transferred by developed countries to the developing countries. In this context, let us try and understand how the climate finance has developed over the previous few years. In this context, we are aware that the Kyoto Protocol as well as the Paris Agreement are two of the landmark agreements of the UNFCCC framework which are related to climate change. In this line, the principle that was adopted was common but differentiated responsibility and respective capabilities principle. Now, this principle is commonly called as the CBDR principle, that is common but differentiated responsibility principle. Now, under this CBDR principle, the developed country parties are to provide financial resources to assist developing country parties in implementing the objectives of the UNFCCC. In this context, the Global Environment Facility was created, which has acted as the financial mechanism's operating institution. In one of the important accords of the UNFCCC, that is the Copenhagen Accord, all the parties agreed for a goal for the world to raise $100 billion by the year 2020 from a wide variety of resources to help developing countries to cut carbon emissions. In 2010, in the COP16, all the parties had created a Green Climate Fund. Besides these important funds that have been created, there are certain special funds that have also been established. These include Special Climate Change Fund, that is the SCCF, the Least Developed Countries Fund, and both of them are being managed by the Global Environment Facility, as well as the Adaptation Fund AF that has been created under the Kyoto Protocol in 2001. So all these are some of the funds that have been created to mitigate climate change or to provide climate finance. However, the performance of these funds has not been optimal. This is because, according to the UNFCCC Standing Committee report, the $100 billion target that was set at the Copenhagen Accord has not been met till now. Further, the efforts to move finance from the private players have also met with comprehensive failures. And there is a huge variation in the estimates also. For example, the OECD report says that around $83 billion have been moved. However, Oxfam report claims that the finance that has been provided is just to the tunes of $21 to $24 billion. So there are wide variety of estimates which are relating to the transfers from the developed to developing countries under the targets that have been set up of $100 billion. Which brings us to what are the challenges that are faced in the climate finance. First, of course, is of insufficient funds. That is, global annual fossil fuel subsidies together with their externalities cost about $5.3 trillion. And if you look at the amount that is being provided, it is just $100 billion, which is even not being met. Further, countries at the Katowice COP24 of the UNFCCC had agreed to initiate formal discussions on new post-2025 mobilization goal in 2020 itself. The next issue here is of climate finance governance. And the issue here is that the countries are concerned as to how the funding should be effectively governed and delivered to the developing countries. So there is no agreement or consensus regarding the process that needs to be followed or what is the governance mechanism for providing the finance from developed to developing countries. Also, there are issues related to definitions and reporting of the climate finance. So even after 10 years of the COP15, there is no agreement on what form of funding can be counted as climate finance under the global climate finance in support of the Copenhagen pledge of $100 billion. And even 7 years after the Paris deal, there is no agreement regarding the definition of climate finance as to if the finance is provided by the private sector, will it be included or not. Also, there are issues relating to reporting and verification because currently there is a lack of mandatory verification mechanism in reporting. And reporting requirements around the projected finance provisions still remain weak. So all these are the issues associated with climate change finance. And also we have seen some of the funds that have been created and the basic definition of climate finance. However, the COP27 will be held very soon and there more clarity will be brought about relating to climate finance. With this, let's take up the next news article now. Now, this article on page number 8 reads that why has France ended its military operations in Sahel? In this line, we are aware that there were various countries in Africa, especially in the northern part of Africa, which were the erstwhile colonies of France during the colonization period before they gained independence around the Second World War. In this context, the issue of colonization of various countries of Africa by France as well as decolonization process in the case of Africa is important for us from world history point of view, and that falls in the static part of our syllabus. However, from prelims examination perspective, it is important for us to understand the Sahel region and its location. Now, we are aware that UPSC has been regularly asking questions from various important locations that are in news which are facing conflict related issues. And that is why we need to be aware of the location of this Sahel region. So if you look at the map of Africa, this Sahel region basically lies to the south of the Sahara Desert. So this is basically a region in the northern part of Africa which lies below the Sahara Desert, and it includes some of the countries like Mauritania, Mali, Niger, Chad, as well as Sudan, as well as Eritrea. So that is all about this Sahel region, and you should be aware of the location of this region. For example, this year a question was asked regarding the location of Levant, and that is why we should be aware of such locations. And this was the question that was asked in the prelims of 2022.